everyone would agree that these are extremely unusual times. About 2 months ago, I was having a conversation with a group of people, including my friend Lee Boyd and Jerry Chapman. And I told them that within 24 to 36 months, we would not recognize America. Things will change so rapidly. Lee actually texted me a few days ago to tell me that it was 22 months ago that I said that to him. Because I could see the drift of things, I could see where things were going. Although things are happening now suddenly, or appearing to be suddenly, they've been building toward this for a very long time. You see, there are two parallel tracks in the scriptures. One is of eternal things, and the other is of natural things. The scriptures are written on that dual level. When we move from the natural things to the eternal things, we're essentially in the realm of the prophetic, where God is speaking from a prophetic point of view to us. The speakings of God may include telling us what the future is going to be. But it's not just a compendium of sayings in the Bible that might have prophetic significance. It's, as I've said, there are two tracks on which things are moving in a parallel fashion. One set of tracks has to do with the fall. The other set of tracks has to do with the restoration. So the end of the age will represent a culmination of all that took place when man separated himself from God and the culture that moved forward in an unbroken way along that arc or on that track. And similarly, the message of redemption and restoration, not just redemption, but restoration, that message is moving on its own track, and they're running parallel. Often they seem to be indistinguishable from each other. The events that are happening in human history may call attention to one as readily as to another. But they're unmistakable themes in the scriptures. They are, if you like, the big picture. The tendency when we face times like these, where there is a rapid spreading of this coronavirus, which the Bible would describe, by the way, as a pestilence, communicable disease, ravaging mankind and the nations of the earth. In the hysteria surrounding it, by which I do not mean to minimize it. It is as bad as it is and will likely get worse. But the hysteria is a different thing. It's fear. Fear has taken over not only this nation, but the world. We should talk about this nation as the land of the free and the home of the brave. But hoarding toilet paper and fighting over canned goods in the grocery store aisles being one extreme of the panic, on the other hand, on Wall Street, which has resulted in dramatic losses on the upper end for people who live on that side of the street. Whether it's one or the other, survival is the best indication of the fear that has come into a nation. And it seems almost quaint to talk about the land of the free and the home of the brave in this moment. These times have exposed a culture that is as deeply embedded in the church, particularly, well, in all forms of church, historic, Roman Catholic, and or, to the other extreme, evangelical. And frankly, one of the reasons we can't hear a clear sound out of the prophetic is because for decades now, nearly 50 years now, the voice of the evangelical church has been conflated with a political voice. And they've, in a sense, looked to Egypt for its survival. So it cannot speak. It cannot speak in a way that might be offensive to the political process. As a result, we see really silliness coming out, by and large, as prophetic utterances. Prophets are as apt, people who have been recognized or thought of as prophets, they're as apt to be selling freeze-dried food, as some of them have been, as they are to offer clear and distinctive sounds to the people of God. And the reason, of course, is that in the compromise, the thing that has been lost is a vibrant connection to the Spirit of God. And therefore, the beginning point of so much of what is said is to protect or preserve previously determined positions. So you pick the list that the prophets are writing on, and you can't hear a proper sound. In fact, the scriptures are plain. It says, if the trumpet gives an uncertain sound, no one can prepare for the battle. But you know, these things didn't happen 2 weeks ago. They happened since the church, they began to happen since the church took a stand of engaging in politics. From that point on, it stopped speaking for God and became essentially pimped by political groups exchanging favors for the support of the church. Now it's just full blown, where the two have been utterly conflated, and there is no distinction between the two. But the people of God are suffering because they have not been exposed, by and large. Occasionally you'll hear a voice like someone crying in the wilderness. But by and large, the sound of the prophetic has been muffled. When an uncertain sound is made, no one can prepare for the battle. Now, let me, as I began to say, there are these two parallel tracks. You know, God is not just throwing things into the earth by way of sounds. He's moving along the arc of one who knows the end from the beginning. Do you suppose for a moment any of this has caught God by surprise? Do you think God doesn't know? Do you think he did not foresee what is now unfolding before us? Nonsense. He is the one who controls everything. He may not be the one who initiates the thing, but he certainly controls the timing in which it comes, and he knows the effects of it before humans know. And he will tell these things to the prophets. So when you begin to think about the times we're in, one of the first things you ought to do is think structurally. In other words, don't just run here and there. I mean, I know enough people who will be running here and there. One particular woman comes to mind who wants to know the latest of everything. But in the years I knew her, she was never changed by anything she heard. She was just a consumer of information. Now, people are in an information overload. And in fact, after Y2K, I made a statement. I made a prediction of sorts. I said, my biggest concern now, following the Y2K event, was that no one would begin to actually speak about the events relating to the culmination of the age in the return of the Lord. Because people got way out there in their own vain imaginations, not hearing from the Holy Spirit, but being moved by logic and by reason. And so they went crazy. They hoarded food, water, the whole bit. And when that didn't happen, many notables in prophetic circles were simply embarrassed and overthrown and lost credibility. Now, things limped along, and then some years ago, the blood moon thing came up. Various popular television preachers, one in particular, wrote a book about it and went on a circuit promoting the book, which probably made him quite a bit of money and garnered him quite a bit of notoriety. But he was wrong. He was wrong. He wasn't speaking for God. He was speaking out of his own logic, out of the way they interpret scriptures. So that contributed to the loss of interest in, and it was viewed as too risky to consider, the scriptures that speak to the return of the Lord. But here all of a sudden, this issue has come roaring back, and the voices of the prophetic are by and large silent, or the sound is so garbled as to be largely garbage. And again, it's because there is no clear understanding of how things were meant to progress, and therefore how the age would end. Things were meant to progress with that which is wicked reaching the point of ripeness. That wickedness would be as wickedness was going to get. And righteousness was going to be as righteousness was going to get. These two tracks, these two separate movements, will take us into the next epoch, the age of the return of the Lord and the establishment of the millennial rule on the earth. So those are the guidelines, those are the guideposts. Now, as it regards the first of these tracks, or the first I wish to discuss, the tract about the decline of human culture, we see that when God is not governing people, when they choose not to retain God in their knowledge, then everyone does what's right in his own eyes. The motivation for which is that survival and surviving as well as you can becomes the preeminent thing. So we're watching it play out in things that seem to threaten human survival. On the other side of and it'll continue on along that arc. The other side of this coin, or the other tract to continue the analogy I was using, is where God has also been preparing his people for these times. 7 years ago, in the city of Midland, Texas, I announced that the Lord was saying to his people to enter their rooms, close their doors, and hide themselves for a little while, because God was about to come out in judgment on the nations. It went over, it had a minimal effect on most people. Some of my contemporaries were quite skeptical. In fact, one of my good friends plainly told me he didn't think that that was accurate, that we shouldn't be withdrawing, we should be charging ahead. There's worlds to be conquered for Christ. I explained that what I'd heard from the Lord was a time to prepare his people. And I had a vision of a neighborhood, not unlike a neighborhood with brownstone houses, and it was like a street that went up a bit. So at the top of the street, I saw what looked like a crazed maniac in a car, revving the motor. And I looked down the street, and I saw children playing in the street. And I was like one of the fathers on the street who called to the children, seeing the danger, and said to them, come into your rooms quickly. And those who did were moved out of danger. The next thing the Lord began to show me was once we were in our rooms, he was going to develop in us a deep understanding of who we are in him and who he is to us. That was about the time the message of sonship really broke into full flowering. And we talked quite a bit about that. The house was arranged for the care of the people under fathers. And we seem to have pulled back, or at least we didn't expand as rapidly as we had been when I was giving attention to public preaching and publicly saying the things that the Lord was showing me. But there was a clear shift in the message that I was meant to bring at that time. So we shifted. And I began to emphasize the need for maturity. So we didn't just talk about the relationship of sonship, but we began to talk about bringing a people to maturity so that they